Okay, most of you know that my project has been contemplative media studies, which I've been defining as the application of contemplative principles and practices to the critical analysis of media content, technologies, and institutions. So there's really two things happening there, two levels or layers. There's the principles and practices, but there's also the analysis and then design and development of content and technologies and institutions. In terms of the principles, one of them that's sort of emerged organically in my classes is a shift from either or thinking to both and thinking. So that includes, for example, including both analog and digital, putting them into relationship with each other, often simultaneously. Local and global, again, almost sometimes simultaneously. The personal and the political, we do both of these at the same time. How do we say yes to both of these and not act as if they're exclusive categories? This is actually just a screenshot from this is my evidence, my data, that I actually do this with my students, that they're required in their final papers to integrate both personal practice and an analysis, a kind of engagement with the transformative social project. They're required to do both of the things. They can't just develop a personal practice. They have to tie it to some sort of transformation that they want to see. So, and in terms of principles, my co-author, Robert Woods, and I have articulated a set of proverbs that is meant to be a response to what we call the Catechism of Silicon Valley, which is a set of ideas that kind of conflates technological capacities with specific virtues. So the book essentially argues that we replace the catechism with a set of proverbs, which maintains these distinctions. And I'm happy to report that the book, we submitted it. I self-nominated. You have to self-nominate for the awards. I self-nominated, and lo and behold, we got the award from Book of the Award for the Religious Communication Association, which is part of NCA. So we're really, really proud of that, and we're trying to promote it aggressively. So in the book, we go through each of these proverbs. There's a chapter for each of those. And then at the end, there's some specific exercises or practices that are really geared towards what you can do just as a reader with your friends or family, but also as teachers in a classroom. And then at the end, we head towards the kind of institutional analysis. So there's a couple chapters, 3 chapters at the end, how to think differently about text. So there's corollaries to the proverbs: inform wisely, remember what storage is for, that sort of thing. And then there's a chapter we called prophetic imagination and institutional change, where we talk about companies that are similar to Shah's that he described yesterday. And then my favorite chapter really is the last chapter, which is taking Martin Luther King's 6 principles of nonviolent resistance and applying them to a critique of the digital economy. So what I wanted to show you today was really kind of a set of 3 examples of projects that emerged out of my teaching. So this is really just one slice of the big pie. It's much more sort of individually and content focused, but it's the starting point for students, sort of the on-ramp for thinking differently. And the first one I wanted to show you is a small machine that I developed with the help of a friend of mine. And it kind of demonstrates this idea of one first step is creating new ways of relating to technology. So I had an exercise in one of my classes where I said, okay, let's brainstorm in small groups. Take Instagram, which has now replaced Facebook as popular among students that I work with. And I want you to do 2 things, two requirements. Come up with a way to use Instagram in a way that is not what the founders had intended, and also takes it and makes it analog in some way, makes it material. They found really difficult to do, but some interesting ideas came out of it. And the initial idea was that we would juxtapose a few Instagram feeds like Beyonce and Pope Francis, and we would print them out bring them into the material world in the form of a printed Mobius strip. And this would be a sort of way of symbolizing in material form the endless scrolling, but it causes you to say both Beyonce, Pope Francis. Okay, we're endlessly scrolling, and it's somehow bringing together, juxtaposing Beyonce, Pope Francis. Okay, this is putting you in a different headspace than what maybe the Instagram founders had intended. Okay, good. So then I was describing this to a friend of mine, and I thought, what if we created a small machine that could just rotate one of these things endlessly? You could just press a button. So my first attempt was extremely rudimentary with some toilet paper rolls and some compostable straws. It didn't work. And then, so I realized that I have a friend who does toy development and knows how to do 3D printing design. So I had my friend, Ben Stack, friend of the family, do a 3D design, and we developed this small machine that I eventually called the Instagram Mobius machine. And we kind of hacked it a little bit. It wasn't the greatest design, and it kept getting stuck. So I had to tell him, okay, we need to make some modifications. So he made some modifications, and then we created a different version of it. And eventually, I'm hoping you can see, right, this is Beyonce and Pope Francis wedded together on the infinite scroll of the Mobius strip. So this is really just meant to be a sort of thought exercise. Other juxtapositions might be like, okay, the hashtag for science and the hashtag for art. Right, print those out. So I went to the UNH Innovation Lab, which is something access to here, and I worked with them. They have a licensing marketplace. So at some point, it's delayed because of the pandemic, but at some point you should be able to go to their licensing marketplace, and you can download the schematics for this, and you can download the instructions and build it as part of your classroom exercise. I think it's something that even elementary school level students or high school level students could do. So that's the first one, was the Instagram Mobius machine. The second one is creating new ways of generating content. So this is, I mentioned yesterday I wanted to show you a music video. So that's what this is. And this is actually picking up on what Greg said earlier. This is in response to the QAnon and the insurrection. So I was trying to think through, how do we think about what's happening with QAnon and the insurrection? And I said, okay, well, if our goal is heading towards a state of wisdom and hope, I teach virtue ethics, so it's about a matter of a middle ground or a balance between two extremes. What are the two extremes that we're stuck in right now? And my argument is that if we want to achieve this balance, integration of wisdom and hope, that has both subjective and objective elements to it, both moral imagination and access to data and information and knowledge. If you have too much of one of those things and not enough of the other, you have a dramatic imbalance. If you have neither of them, then you have a state of ignorance and despair. So there's like three extremes that we're currently stuck in. We don't have too much of the wisdom and hope. So then there's also, if you have too much moral imagination, but it's untethered to reality or information or science or data, that's fantasy and delusion, and that could be extremely problematic. At the other extreme, if you have lots of access to information, data, and knowledge, but very little or unsophisticated or somehow corrupt moral imagination, then you've got an attitude of cynicism and contempt. So I like to illustrate these things. This is my little illustration of ignorance and despair. QAnon represents fantasy and delusion. This is a keyboard in the form of a grenade. So that's like the Russian troll farms, they're essentially doing that. Now, what's interesting about this, yesterday when Shah was talking, I thought, I've been having a hard time of putting an exemplar up here. And I thought, Nava, that's what's going up here. Because what he's doing is he's doing this integrated, holistic kind of thinking where he's bringing together a set of values, a personal vision, a set of values and practices, but also integrating it with organizational structure and the transformation of our broader sort of digital economy. It's leading towards some greater transformation. So I like what he's doing. Unfortunately, what tends to happen in our digital economy, and this is part of the problem that I think Segal was getting at yesterday in questioning Andy, is that we're stuck in a kind of spiral where commerce, all the clickbait and the ka-ching of the digital economy drags us from the first extreme state of ignorance and despair into either fantasy and delusion or cynicism and contempt, and actually not either or, again, both and there's a very problematic resonance between these extremes. Commerce tends to prey on people who are in states of ignorance and despair and lead them into either extreme of fantasy and delusion or cynicism and contempt in ways that feed off of each other. Luckily, we have art and journalism, and we have policies and regulation. We have educational systems. And ideally, what we need to do is strengthen those things which keep us on the path towards wisdom and hope and away from those extremes. Here's a little trick that I like to do, where if you imagine that middle line, middle is, if this is like a square piece of paper and you fold it along that dotted line, you can kind of illustrate how these two extremes are actually much closer than you might think of at first. So naivete and cynicism are actually two sort of mirrors each other. And we clean this up a little bit. The spiral of our digital economy is sucking people out of ignorance and despair into either you're working for a Russian troll farm or you're part of QAnon. That's the problem what we've got now. We've got not enough happening on this line here because there's no ka-ching in there. So my idea of contemplative media is to sort of say, what can we put into place, what devices, practices, institutional models, etc., can keep us on this path. So the second example is having to do with content. So I did a project, actually Stuart was just mentioning how, he was able to present in Europe, and I was able to do a virtual presentation with my friend Lisa Zahabi through a university in Oslo. There was an arts-based conference, and we presented she's a video and graphic designer and text designer. And so I got her to do some visual work and animation for songs that I wrote. So songs and music that I wrote. One of them, and I'm just being a little bit playful, but one of them is called Dolphins in Venice. I'll show you a little clip from that. And the other is called Angry Outsiders. And both of these are songs and videos that address this idea of disinformation or misinformation during the pandemic in one way or another. So if you heard about this, Dolphins in Venice was this rumor going around that during the pandemic, because there were fewer humans out there, the dolphins were returning to the canals in Venice, which wasn't really true. They were returning to some canals like 500 miles away from Venice. But people kind of wanted to believe that, there's something metaphorically appealing I found about the idea of dolphins in Venice that I wanted to write a song about it. And same thing with the QAnon. I wanted to write something about that. And so the idea here is that what we're doing in song and video design is we're kind of integrating art and journalism. So the way that I started doing the lyric writing was to print out a number of exemplary journalistic or news reporting pieces about dolphins in Venice as the first one, or about QAnon and the insurrection. And then what you do in poetic transcription is you read them and you wait for phrases to pop out at you. You sort of aggregate those phrases and then you arrange them into a poem. So Dolphins in Venice became a what do you call it? A sonnet, a 14-line sonnet that's basically just pulled directly from news reports about these rumors of dolphins in Venice. And then Angry Outsiders was a little bit looser in form, but still pulled from, so there's like direct quotes from people like Roger Stone or Michael Flynn, So if you can imagine, I'm like literally giving voice to like the QAnon shaman. So imagine that as a contemplative moment or practice. So I wanted to show you a couple of clips of these. If someone can tell me what time I'm at here, I want to make sure this is a clip of from Dolphins in Venice. It's maybe a couple of minutes long here. Okay.
False hopes for Mother Nature's victory. Fantasies click fueled by attention lust. So say the experts in psychology, who warn against a spiral of distrust.
Okay, really nice video animation work from my friend Lisa Zahabi. And then I wanted to show you a slightly longer excerpt from Angry Outsiders, because I think this one is really much more provocative. It's used some actual video footage of the infection. And again, all the lyrics here are taken from, some of them are literally quotes from people like Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, and Porter's The QAnon Shaman.
Blind truth, face painted martyrs. Drum beats, we march, storms coming one way, or another way. Angry outsiders, gospel, all willing to testify in this guns and love parade. This country is awake.
Oh, stop it there. What's interesting is that the final lyric in this piece I got from a news report where they're talking about how QAnon is essentially oops. Can you still hear me? Uh-oh.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, good. Something screwy on my end. Anyway, and one of the quotes from this woman was saying, how do you get people out of a cult? She said, share with them the songs that they once loved. And I thought that's got to be like the final verse of the song. So it kind of leads up to that. Are you still?
Kevin? Okay, you're cutting out a bit here.
Are you there?
We are.
Okay, good. It almost crashed on my end. So I just had one more thing to share. The third one was creating applications that encourage both and thinking. I already spoke to you about the college woods exercise that I've done, where I lead people into the woods, give them an envelope that contains news images. They use a push pin to create a sort of corollary location, and then they walk from their starting point to a corollary location that is like 2 points in a low scale where it's been hospitalized. So I've described this elsewhere, but last summer, after we entered lockdown, I thought, I want to be able to do this cross distances. My friend Carolyn Kinane, who works for she's a director at the Center for Contemplative Studies down at UVA. She and I developed a way of using Google Earth and ArcGIS geolocation systems to create a essentially rudimentary kind of app on our phones, so that we can not only that we're in a local space and a global space, but that we're doing that. I'm also in my backyard and in her backyard, and she's in her backyard and my backyard. So we're kind of doing the same thing, but separated, another layer of separation. So the way that I did this was by using Google Earth and ArcGIS to layer. I'll show you. This is what you can see if you use Google Earth and zoom in. So like down where she lives in Virginia, she has a nature preserve behind her, and she can go onto her phone on Google Earth and see the map superimposed. And then after we both do the exercise, you can then go back through and she can see where I traveled in my local space, and she can click to see the photographs that I took in response, and I can click to see the photographs that she took in response. It's hard to get your head around this unless you're looking at it, but so I described this in a chapter. This is a screenshot of the ArcGIS map app version of it. And I used that as a way of thinking through the ethics of mixed reality and augmented reality. And so I came up with a different schematic that's sort of a more expanded version of the one I showed you earlier here. And that's going to come out in as a chapter in a book called Augmented and Mixed Reality for Community.